the new features also implemented in the different plugins. So yeah, switch. So yeah, we'll start with the plugin improvements, and then we'll talk about the new editor features. And then if you have any questions, do not hesitate to post them in the chat. So first, the plugin improvements. So first, we implemented the vertex animation textures in Unity. So this was already implemented in Unreal Engine. And so it's now working in Unity. We have the 3 different types of vertex animation textures, which are the soft, fluid, and rigid animations. So here is a quick example of importing an effect directly in Unity, and it should just work. So as you can see on the left, we have like the closed simulation for the soft VATs. In the middle, we have the smoke for the fluids, and on the right, you can see the pig head broken on the floor, which is the rigid VAT. So you can directly import those Houdini VATs in the PopcornFX editor, and then those effects should run smoothly in Unity when importing them. So the next thing is the Unreal Engine 5 support, which is a preview version of the PopcornFX plugin for Unreal Engine 5. So yeah, as you can see here, it's just there's not much to say, just run in Unreal Engine 5. We also dropped the support for Unreal Engine 4.25. So we just support the latest Unreal Engine versions. And yeah, you can see it just works. And the third plugin improvements we're going to talk about is the PopcornFX plugin for O3D, which is now way easier to set up in a new project in O3D. So you can set up this directly from our Git repository. So when you're creating a new project, you just have to go to add repository. You can add the PopcornFX O3DE gem repository, and then go back to your gem lists, and it should be listed in the gems that you can use for this project. So you can just enable the right version, and PopcornFX should be enabled for your O3D project. So yeah, that was for the 3 main plugin improvements for 2.11. And now we're going to switch to a live demo to show you the new features in editor, in the PopcornFX editor. So I'll just quit this presentation, and I'll start by showing you the new tutorials we added. So we added a new material, which is a dithering material, meaning that it renders the particles as opaque, but using a dithering patterns to render or not some pixel depending on the particle alpha value. So on the stream, it's not very obvious that this is an opaque particle. So I can show you by just doing a print screen. I can paste that in Paint and zoom in so that you can see the dithering pattern on the particle. So yeah, as you can see, all the pixels that are rendered here are opaque pixels, and it just renders accordingly to that dithering pattern. So this could be used as an optimization because it avoids salting particles, for example. And also, depending on your rendering pipeline in your game engine, could be way more efficient to compute lighting on opaque objects than on semi-transparent objects. So this is mostly for optimization purposes. So we provide examples of these features for all the different types of renderers in PopcornFX. So this is on the ribbons. So as you can see here, it uses the ribbon opaque material. And the type of opaque we just had like solid before. which is completely solid, and masked, which just choose an alpha value to cut the particle. And so now we have this new dithered feature, which renders way better. Yeah. So as I said, this worked for all the different types of particles. So we have the tutorial for the billboards, for the ribbons, for the meshes also. So this is for the triangles. And we have a cool tutorial for the meshes. So this is a cool use case of dithering that shows how to switch between LOD levels, two different LOD levels smoothly. So it basically have two meshes, one for each LOD level, and it just fade out one mesh using one dithering pattern and fade in the other mesh using the opposite dithering pattern so that all pixels are always drawn. But yeah, it makes a smooth transition, as you can see. And yeah, I'll let Julien talk about the new UI improvements in the effect editor.
Right. So one thing we've been asked for quite some time was to improve the asset picker. So for example, when you go inside the renderer and you want to pick a texture, before you had to either type or paste the text path to your texture, or click the browse button and go through your folders in your project and find your texture. Now, when you click that, or when you click the preview, you have the list of all the textures, and you can search a specific texture. You see their previews, and you can basically pick the one you like. The nice thing is also that it works for materials. So before it was pretty painful, wasn't very clear to everybody where they should browse these materials, what was available. So now, same thing, you just have the list of all the available materials in the project. So right now it lists everything. It doesn't filter the materials based on the render type. So here it's a billboard render. It will still display the decal, light, ribbon material. So you still have to, it's not ideal. We still have some improvements to do. You'll still have to be careful on what you pick. But yeah, it's already a pretty nice improvement compared to before. And this works for all resources. You have the same thing for meshes, atlases, things like that. Also in the curve editor, you can now type simple math expressions in the value boxes. So we added that feature for property grid values in, I don't remember if it was 2.9 or 2.10. And this, the curve editor input boxes was the only place that was missing. So we added that for 2.11. And yeah, you can type stuff like sine of 45 degrees times 2 or something like that, and it gives you that value. Or I don't know, pi gives you 314, or a square root of 2, yeah, things like that, divided by 4, yeah, divided by 10. So it's not super useful, to be honest. What you'd really want here would be to select a control point or multiple control points and be able to do something, to type something like multiply their values by 10. It's what you most usually want to do with such a feature. Like you want to rescale everything in your curve. Well, you select everything, you would type something like times 10, and it would work. Here, it doesn't work. It sets everything to whatever this evaluates to, and here typing times 10 is an error, so it evaluates to 0, so it has placed all my control points to 0. But yeah, there is still room for improvement to that. We'll probably add this capability as a next step, but yeah, it's already a small improvement compared to before. Speaking of curves, so this is a 3D curve, and in this effect it represents the path that the particles follow. So if I take a quick look at the graph, here I sample that curve, I offset it by a VRAND at spawn, and I scale it based on this other curve so that it expands and shrinks near the birth and the death of the particle anyway. And I wire that into the position of the billboard, so effectively the particles follow that curve. Now if I want to see that curve, it's not very explicit what these mean as a 3D object curve. Well, in 2.11 we added that little button at the top of the viewport, and when you click it, you will see a path. So in the stream, I'm not sure it will be very visible. I toggle the billboard quickly so that it hides the particles, and yeah, so you see the path here, and when you edit the curve, well, the path updates in the viewport and change the tangents, stuff like that. So yeah, pretty neat feature. And so it didn't make it for 2.11, but in 2.12 we have added the ability to move the control points directly inside the viewport. So yeah, unfortunately not in 2.11, but it's already done in 2.12, so it will be in the next version. What else do I have on my list? Oh yeah, right. So we added the ability to preview exported events in the effect editor. So here I have, let me re-enable quickly the billboard, right. So here in that effect, I have three basic layers: the original particles that follow the path, some yellow particles that are emitted from these parent particles, pretty rarely. These yellow particles fall on the ground, and when they collide, the physics node has the event collide output that we take, we export it from that layer, and we use that to wire it in a small sparky, red sparky thing. But we also took that event collide and wired it into an output node. So you just take the event, type output, and here in the effect interface, when I validate, you will see that I have this event that appears. And this is available to the game engine. And from there, you can, in engine, choose to trigger different things. For example, you could trigger blueprints, I guess, in Unreal, or trigger other effects, or whatever kind of gameplay thing you
Script in Unity.
Yeah, script in Unity. Whatever kind of gameplay thing you'd want to react to events sent by the particles. And you can now preview that in the effect editor. So in the scene properties panel, we have the effect backdrop. And here you have a small checkbox under the event collide in the effect interface, bind to effect backdrop. And if I check that, well, I don't have any effect backdrop set up. Oh, yes, I do. Wait, what?
And of course, that's the demo effect. Oh yeah, auto start.
No, it shouldn't. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, not sure why it didn't work there. Okay, so that's what it's supposed to do. You bind it to the effect backdrop and it triggers your effect backdrop. So here I picked a version of the torch fire, which I call torch fire momentary. And the original torch fire is an infinitely emitting effect. So this keeps on forever. But here, because we want to use that to preview something that happens, an event that happens over and over, it would very quickly reach thousands of instances. So I made this smaller version, momentary, which only lasts for a second, and then it stops emitting. So it's a small burst of flame and smoke. And that's what I bind here. Yeah, there is definitely a weird thing.
Bind to effect backdrop.
Oh yeah, that's... Forgot to check the checkbox. Right. So now when those yellow particles collide, they trigger the small red sparky things, and they trigger the external event, which here triggers the effect backdrop as a ways to preview what it would look like in game. Right. So another small UI node graph quality of life thing is that we added next to the color nodes, we added a small preview of the actual color. So if I drop an actual color node and if I pick let's say some greenish color, you'll see the green rectangle here, or let's say some purple or whatever. So here in the graph, you have an instant preview of what that color is set to. Small note here, you will need to change some settings to see that, because by default right now, it will not appear. So here, show pin values, this is considered the value of a pin, the little color square. And by default, the pin values are not shown when the pin name is considered a complex name. So here, for example, in some built-in nodes, we know that there is no real point in showing by default that this pin is called life on the life node, or that there is no real point in showing that this pin is named value and value B and value as the output for simple math nodes. So we don't show these. And when the pin has a simple name like that, by default we show the value. But when we display the name of the pin, by default we don't show the value. This was an early decision to avoid having the graph be too complex with too many texts and infos displayed. In the end, maybe we'll switch it by default to always, because it turns out it's pretty useful to still have it. So yeah, you just click on the little wrench icon to pop the node graph settings, change show pin values to always, and it will always show the values, and in this case the color rectangle, even if the pin name is complex. And you also have show pin default values. So the default values are usually 0, and so here rotation is 0. There is no 0 display because it's the default value, it's not overridden. If I check that, you'll have 0 displayed here. You'll have 0, 0, 0 displayed as a position for the local to world node, etc., etc. Yeah, anyway, so we already kind of improved the color thing with the display on the constant nodes of the colored rectangle, but now it's a bit better too with the pin values. Right. Very small quality of life thing also. When you this is going to some niche domains. When you add an append payload or an extract payload node, let's say I name this my color type 4. If you want to create an input from this by dragging the value pin and creating an input node, before it would not prefill anything. Here it prefills the same name and types and etc. as what you had filled in the payload node. So it's a very tiny quality of life improvement. You have less stuff to do, less typing to do. Also now, when you want to capture the thumbnail or the animated thumbnail of the effect, we ported a feature that was in the version 1 PopcornFX editor, which was pretty useful. It displays the rectangle of what will be captured, so that you can adjust your effect to have something nice captured. Usually, well, I know that when I capture thumbnails before that, I always have to capture them 3 or 4 times, going back to the content browser, seeing, oh, does it look like, no, okay, let me zoom in a bit more, recapture, etc. So this is also a small quality of life improvement. And last thing that I'll show you on my side, this is also pretty niche, but it's actually quite a nice optimizer improvement. So let me disable that. So here, if I pull this panel, you can see that I have, right, I have 13 mediums because I triggered the other effect. Okay, I'll reopen it quickly. Right, so here I have 6 particle mediums. These are basically layers, except there is one more for the timeline track. So here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the root event, which is the timeline track. So that's 6 actual simulations running for this effect, 6 particle simulations for this effect. This event multiplier is instantaneous. It has a 0 duration. And now in 2.11, with full optimizations, so if I switch to shipping, here you will see that I'm down to 5 particle mediums, and that this layer here has turned is not lit anymore, meaning there is no timing also underneath, meaning there is no simulation running for that. Yet it still works. You still have the 10 sparks per hit. And what this is that the optimizer saw that this event multiplier had a duration of 0, and it just entirely removed it and replaced it by a rewiring inside the connection map, which is the internal representation of all the layers, but never mind. It's basically as if you had made 10 connections like this to the final layer. And this will do exactly the same thing as having an event multiplier with a spawn count of 10 and a duration of 0. So yeah, that's a small optimizer improvement, but which in practice is pretty useful. We have looked at a lot of effects done by studios and run a before and after on this optimization, and it catches quite a lot of cases where this is useful. Obviously, if in the child layer you extract some payloads that are added by the event multipliers, such as the emitted count, the parent life ratio, stuff like that, this optimization cannot happen because it needs to compute these payloads and add them, and etc. But if it's just a regular multiplier, 0 duration, any spawn count, well, I think there is a threshold internally. Like it's not going to do that probably if you have 100 particles spawning, but up to a certain amount, it will do that optimization. Anyway, now I'll give the mouse back to Paul for a few last things.
Yeah, I'll show you another useful visualization in 2.11 that we added. So this is for the spatial layers. So if I open an effect that uses spatial layers like this one, where each particle queries its neighbors to draw a link between them. So you can now display the actual acceleration structure that is used under the hood. So just by clicking this toggle highlight of spatial layer grid, and you can see the acceleration structure that is used, so the hash grid that is used to query the particles. So this could be also useful for optimizations, as each one of those cells is colored depending on the number of particles in it. So like if you have thousands of particles in the same cell, it means that the acceleration structure won't optimize much the queries. So you need to make sure that you have few particles in each cell. So if I take the spatial layer for these particles and increase the size of the cells, for example, you see that the cells that contains lots of particles are now colored orange, meaning that those cells are way too big for this effect. So yeah, you can basically tweak the acceleration structure for the spatial layer using this visualization to optimize your effects. So next thing I'm gonna show you, which is mostly for the SDK users that are integrating PopcornFX in their own game engines. We have the PKRI files, which are basically the integration features that are handled by the rendering. And we made a few improvements on the UI for that. So here you can see the different rendering features that you have access to on the renderers. And so before the UI was way more complex, now you can very easily toggle, so expose, for example, the property to a shader. So you get this little eye here that says if this property is actually accessible in the shader. So for example, here for the lit rendering feature, which is basically used on all renderers. We have access to all those properties in the shaders, and you can easily toggle them on and off to, like, if you need a new property in the shader, you can just click on the eye and it will add it. You could use it in the shader. So that's the first thing for the PKRI, and we also added a show documentation menu here, where you can click and it actually opens your browser, and it shows for each rendering feature which renderer it supports, and then you get, just as the template generation documentation generation, a quick description for each feature of what it means, what each input or property of this rendering feature means. And so this can be very, very useful for integrators where you are not sure which feature is used for which renderer, in which shader you should implement each one of those. So this makes it a lot clearer to know what you have to implement or not in your shaders. And I think that's it for the features, for the new features. Is there any question in the chat, maybe?
Yep, so if you have any questions,
do not hesitate.
We'll be happy to answer.
And yeah. Otherwise, that's it for the
that's it for 2.11.
And so we'll see you on the 2.12 live stream, I guess.
Yep, this will be close to GDC, I suppose. 2.12 will be the GDC build, basically. Yeah.
Yep. So thank you very much, everyone.
Yep. We'll have a small booth at GDC this year, but yeah, maybe we'll see you there for 2.12. And yeah, we'll make announcements in good time. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And bye-bye.
Bye.